This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman. And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Gotham City is out of control.
An entire city screaming in fear.
Supervillains walk the streets, preying on the innocent.
They will learn the true nature of power.
The police are powerless. A creature prowls this urban wasteland.
Who's that?
He moves in darkness. For some, he is a rumor, a name whispered in the corridors of the underworld, waiting for the chance to strike. Let every criminal know the acid taste of fear.
You crazy! Bat! Giant bat!
Gotham has forgotten what justice means. The Dark Knight is here to remind them. Who are you? Batman. Good guys wear black.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 248 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal. With me, my good friend, good brother, the man that runs our Twitter account, Liam. Liam, we are continuing here in the month of February with a month of Batman the Animated Series reviews. And as you mentioned last week, as we previewed this week's episode, it's the week of love. You know, it's always a time for love. It's always a time to love one another and just, you know, pour it out and love on your best friends or your significant other, whoever that person is in your life. But this is the week that pops up on the calendar where Hallmark tells us that we have to go out of our way to show it. So what better way to do so than with a romantic love story with quite the twist in it, as we cover this week's episode of Batman the Animated Series.
That's right. So we talked about what it would be last week. It's a Poison Ivy focused episode, first one of those in a while. It's the episode House and Garden. And boy, it takes some turns, as we'll get to. But yes, this is this is the general setting of domestic bliss and romance and starting a family. It's all the themes are there, but of course, when our stories take place in Gotham City, they tend to take a pretty hard left turn at some point, and this episode is no exception.
That is right. We will get into all of the twists and turns here in just a moment. Before we do, of course, we're going to get the official IMDb synopsis for this week's episode, which originally aired here in the United States on Fox, on the Fox Kids programming block back on May the 2nd, 1994, meaning we are coming up in just a few months here on the 29-year anniversary of this episode's original debut. Liam, we would love to hear the official IMDb synopsis, which is, of course, brought to you by The Pod Tower. Head over to youtube.com/The Pod Tower. Check out every prior episode review, including the ones that have featured Poison Ivy in them, all available for you on YouTube. If you listen to your podcast there, it's a great opportunity. Head over to youtube.com/The Pod Tower. Subscribe today, like our videos, and not only will you get content from us, but you get great content from some other great DCAU content creators.
Absolutely. So this is the synopsis for House and Garden, which is written by Paul Dini and directed by Boyd Kirkland, with music by Shirley Walker and animation by Dong Yang. And that synopsis reads as such. Poison Ivy, after being released from Arkham, has apparently settled for a normal life. Married to her psychiatrist and doting on his two children. Sorry, I didn't read this before. I tried to read it out loud. Married to her psychiatrist and doting on his two children. Batman and Robin are suspicious. However, because Batman and Robin... It's so long. Batman and Robin are suspicious, however, because semi-sentient plant-like creatures are committing mayhem all over Gotham.
Yeah, that one's it's a bit too wordy. that one would take up like the entire back cover of a book if you're trying to just like look at the book there. It's like, did you just tell me the entire inside and outside of this plot here? I'd give that one probably a D. So our streak of A's end up coming to an end after a streak of 2. Is it still
after 2?
Is it considered a streak if it's 2? Is that just a happenstance? But let's get into the plot, Liam. As we open up, we see a giant lumbering green shaded creature climbing up his way through a building and in through a door. We get these yellow creepy eyes, and it's pretty much completely in shadow minus a little bit of green. But he breaks into this apartment and begins tearing things off of the wall, headed right for an abstract painting of sorts, and headed right for the safe that lurks behind it. And whoever this poor gentleman is, this poor bachelor that lives in this apartment, is startled as he enters the room and happens to see a monster just completely destroying his room. And as he tries to confront said monster, of course not knowing that it's a monster, he is immediately assaulted. And we learn very quickly in the next scene that there is actually that he's not been knocked out, but on top of it, he's also been poisoned. And we learn through some dialogue between Commissioner Gordon and a scientist. I guess it's a like a forensic scientist or something that is there discussing the case with the commissioner, that the strange green substance that they find at the crime scene is indeed poison, and that it's been found in at least 4 other cases recently in the past month. It's at this point that Batman walks in, and we learn that the victims, unfortunately, don't seem to be doing very well, and they're unsure whether or not they're going to be able to keep them alive for much longer. Batman lurks and walks in and believes that his prime suspect in this case of strange poisoning has to go back to one Poison Ivy, aka Pamela Isley.
This is the 4th identical poisoning this month. We've kept the victims alive so far, but we're not even sure what kind of poison it is.
Why don't you ask the woman who made it? Poison Ivy.
She was our first guess, but we ruled her out.
You mean she's still in Arkham?
No, she completed her rehabilitation 6 months ago. The board gave her a clean bill.
And now wealthy bachelors are being struck down by an unknown toxin. Sounds like Ivy's MO to me.
I don't think she's interested in single men anymore. You haven't heard? Not only did Pamela Isley clean herself up, she also got married.
But Jim Gordon is quick to correct him and say that while that was also the top suspect on their list, that she has apparently gone on the straight and narrow. And because she's gone on the straight and narrow at this point, they don't believe that she could possibly be the person behind it all. Batman, again, full of skepticism, believes that it's that she's likely still the prime suspect in this case, but he finds out that not only has Poison Ivy completed her sentence and her therapy at Arkham, but she's also married and started a little family. So yeah, go figure. This is where our romantic wedded bliss storyline, as we mentioned, sort of comes into play. And Batman really suspects still that something might be going on here. So he and Gordon set off to visit Miss Isley, or as we soon learn, Miss Carlisle, at her residence in the outskirts of Gotham.
Hi. Come on in.
Thank you, Miss Isley.
My pleasure, Commissioner. Though it's Carlisle now. Mrs. Pamela Lillian Carlisle. This is my husband, Stephen.
Hello, Commissioner. Nice to see you again.
Dr. Carlisle is our liaison between the board at Arkham and the police department.
You also teach classes on criminal psychology at Gotham State. I've read some of your works. They were very impressive.
Thank you. But I get the feeling this isn't a social call.
Someone is poisoning and robbing wealthy young men. As painful as it sounds, all clues point to your wife.
That's outrageous. Pamela hasn't...
Darling, please. Batman, I don't doubt that I was your first and probably only suspect. Over the years, you and I have had a rather intense relationship. But that's all in the past. Believe me, I look back on what I was and I shudder. Locked away in Arkham with the obsessed and the insane, and me just as lost as any of them. And then I met Stephen. His love and guidance brought me into the light again.
That's right. So yeah, Batman and Gordon, after kind of discussing things with Miss Isley, Gordon seems pretty satisfied that she's moved on, and certainly with the endorsement of both her doctor and husband. That's an ethical. I mean, we find out later he wasn't. He didn't do it willingly, but it's like nobody raised eyebrows at the doctor marrying his patient. All right. But anywho,
yeah, what kind of situation they have going on over there in Arkham? Like, what is this normal? Patients
right.
are marrying their like there wasn't any sort of ethical, like, is he he's still, as far as we know, on staff at Arkham. It doesn't say like he left Arkham, so that would be an immediate, like, maybe he had some.
I think you get fired.
Yeah, that seems. Isn't that why Harleen Quinzel left Arkham to begin with, so that she could run away with the Joker?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
mm-hmm.
Okay, all right, just tracking.
These Arkham doctors, not.
So there is a precedent. However,
it's hard. I imagine it's hard to date when you could be held hostage by the Mad Hatter, and at any given moment of your day, maybe it's hard to find time for a social life. But sure. 2 for 2 so far on psychiatrists dating their Arkham patients, turning out to not be a good thing. But yeah, we with that break, we cut to Dick Grayson, swinging bachelor Dick Grayson, as he's studying with a young co-ed for his upcoming finals at Gotham University. And just as things seem to be heading in the direction of romance, he gets a phone call from Batman, who kind of ruins the mood, so to speak. And
don't tell me the great Dick Grayson is spending the night in for a change.
Hey, we got finals coming up.
But what about those cheerleaders I always see chasing you around? Can't they help you pass calculus?
That's not the reason I asked you over.
Oh, no?
No, I just thought it would be fun to get together and study and talk and,
And?
Hello?
It's me.
Oh, hi. I wasn't expecting to hear from you tonight.
I'd better go.
Do you have company?
Not anymore.
Sorry. I need you to check on a teacher there at GSU. Stephen Carlisle.
I was in his class last year. Nice guy. He's not in trouble, is he?
Possibly. See what you can find on him. Family history, places he's worked, anything.
Right. I'll check back with you later. Cindy?
Dick mentions that he had taken a class of his in the previous semester, and that he was a nice guy, but that something seems afoot. And before they can really go on with much more conversation, Dick hears a knock at his door, and he thinks perhaps it's his young girlfriend Cindy coming back to apologize, but instead it is seemingly the same green hulking monster that we saw in our little cold open there. And that's our big dramatic act break, because we see the hand swinging down, and before we know it, Dick is out, and we cut back after that to the dorm room, where it's now a crime scene, and Commissioner Gordon is there along with Bruce Wayne. We got some more great Bruce Wayne outfits to talk about in visuals.
Oh heck yeah! Back-to-back weeks here.
But yes, we discussed that unlike with Bruce, with the other billionaires and millionaires who have been attacked by these monsters, Bruce has something perhaps even more valuable than money and valuables to steal or to or to get the most bang for your buck, I guess. When you're holding up Bruce Wayne, you don't go after his physical property, you go after his ward. So Bruce is ready to pay the ransom and get it back, or he's thinking over his options, I should say, as he's back in his car driving away back to the manor. And wouldn't you know it, he picks up a stowaway in the form of, again, the same strange hulking monster. Turns out it could talk.
Keep driving, or your neck gets a new air hole.
What do you want?
I do the talking. Bring $5 million in cash to the docks tomorrow midnight. Come alone, or the kid is history. Nod if you understand. Smart boy.
And we see that it has these kind of strange claws, which I guess we figure out are what is they're using to poison these people. And he holds a claw to Bruce's neck and instructs him to bring a suitcase full of cash to the docks the next night. And then just again, we find out later that these are sort of mindless drones that Poison Ivy has created. Spoiler alert.
Mm-hmm.
But like, he slams when he's gonna make his escape, he slams Bruce's head as hard as he can into the steering wheel. I'm like, what if Bruce Wayne is unconscious, foot goes down on the gas, and he crashes it into the side of the road and dies?
Right.
How are you gonna get your money then?
Right. Yeah. You pretty much blew it at that point. Not exactly the smartest thing to do when you have money literally driving your car. So yeah.
Right. So Bruce heads back to the manor. He and Alfred the next morning are kind of discussing the situation. Alfred seems like overly concerned about the money. like
he's got to know where that I was saying, where's that paycheck coming from? He's
a little concerned that this might affect his holiday bonus, I guess. But
he's a senior citizen at this point. He's not. I mean, I don't. Is he a U.S. citizen? Is he eligible to collect Social Security? We don't know. But so at this point, what's he going to go out?
The British CIA or whatever he's in.
Right.
To have a pension,
right? Yeah, was he going to go out and find another job taking care of another rich family? You think Veronica Vreeland's just out there hiring butlers left and right? I mean, he's worried about where his next paycheck's going to come from.
Absolutely. So Alfred's a little bit concerned, but Bruce says the priority number one is getting Dick back, and without any sort of other leads to go on, he doesn't feel like he has a choice but to turn over the money to this creature. However, he still is pretty sure at this point that Poison Ivy is somehow involved in it. And so he decides he's going to go out in broad daylight and follow her around in the Batman costume. It's not Matches Malone going out. It's not the reporter disguise from the Croc episode. It's Batman in a tree on top of like residential suburban residential homes.
Yep.
Just out in the middle of daylight, spying on her as she takes the kids to school and shops and everything. And he's got like a little radio receiver hooked up that where he's talking to Alfred.
What's she doing now, sir?
Buying squash. I've been keeping tabs on her all morning. And so far, she's done nothing more incriminating than return an overdue video. Even paid the late fee.
Could it be Poison Ivy truly has reformed?
I want to believe it. Why can't I? The greenhouse checks out, too. Nothing but plants and flowers.
Sir?
Later.
He keeps pointing out that, well, she's not doing anything sinister. She's not doing anything strange. She dropped the kids off. She looks like your regular suburban homemaker. And Alfred asks him, "Hey, is it possible that she's really changed? That this is all legitimate?" And Batman really wants to believe it, but he just can't bring himself to. And as he follows her and back to the house after picking the kids up from school. He's seemingly about to kind of disengage from his reconnaissance, and at that point, some vines that were across the chimney come to life and tie him up, and seemingly she has him dead to rights. But Poison Ivy just lets him down. Pamela just lets him down, and once again explains that she has no interest in this old criminal life of hers, and that all she's ever really wanted was to have a family. And for the first time that she can remember, she's truly happy. And it's at that point that the Batman does believe her, and even calls her Mrs. Carlisle, which is the doctor's name, for the first time. So seemingly with suspect number one now ruled out, Bruce and just, gosh, I can't wait to talk about this in visuals. He's dressed in this like black overcoat and fedora, like he's the Shadow, or the Spirit or something. It's incredible. We're out on the foggy docks. We'll certainly talk more about this in visuals. And he's ready to make the exchange. He's brought his big suitcase o' cash, and the Green Monster is here with Dick in tow, all tied up. But pretty quickly, the situation deteriorates when it's clear it isn't just going to be a simple exchange.
Yes, despite yelling in a very stern voice at this hulking monster to show the boy over and over again and demand that he release him, yes, the monster is in no way intimidated. And not only does he get the money, but he then hurls Bruce, after a brief struggle, into the off of the dock and into the harbor below. And luckily, Bruce was prepared for this, and it looks like that Bruce might have been poisoned, as he gets scraped in the back, just as we saw the attack on the first gentleman at the very opening of the episode. So he has these scrape marks across his back, and he's plunged into the cold waters below. However, Bruce, once plunging into the waters, takes off said overcoat and reveals that underneath of it he had some sort of like padding or protection in order to stave off the attack. So you gotta love the ingenuity, and hey, there's a canonical reason for why he was wearing this oversized jacket and coat at the trade-off here. So and not only was he prepared with this extra layer of protection, he was prepared with the Bat jet ski, which we can perhaps talk about later on. But first time, last time, only time appearance of the Bat jet ski, I think. I don't.
Nightwing's skidding around on one in one of the episodes.
He is. I guess you could technically. This one has some pretty neat fins, and definitely would have been a great action figure accessory, if I do say so. But yes, Batman. Bruce changes into the Batman suit, and just as the Green Monster appears to be ready to do away with Dick at this point, he is attacked by Batman, somehow launching himself up high enough for this giant dock. Don't ask me how the physics worked, but he got the thing high enough to launch it up and onto the dock in an attack against the Green Monster. He's able to sort of to scare the monster away, and
after cutting off the claws with the Batarang.
That's right. He does slice off the claws, and the monster is immediately terrified. So the monster then hurls some crates at Batman and runs away, and Batman goes to sort of check on Dick to make sure everything's okay. So we get the next scene is Batman and Robin sort of discussing exactly what they saw, and Robin again pointing back to Poison Ivy as the obvious choice as to who's behind this all. But Batman suddenly potentially maybe believing that she has turned over a new leaf. And mentions that he interviewed her, he saw her, he met both her and her husband Carlisle, who Bruce had, as you mentioned, had called in order to try and get Dick to do some reconnaissance on this professor, because not only was he not only did he work at Arkham Asylum, but he also worked at the Gotham University. Also, so Dick was very familiar with him because he was one of his teachers. He took one of his classes, and Batman happens to mention in this little conversation that they're having that he met Carlisle and his two sons, at which point Robin begins to question, not only did he believe that Carlisle's ex-wife was the one that had custody of the kids, but that their two kids were not, in fact, boys, but they were girls.
I guess I should be grateful that thing used a fist on me and not poison.
Right. But we're still in the dark as to who's behind this.
You don't think it's the plant lady?
All she wants is to be left alone with her husband and sons.
Sons?
Carlisle's two boys, Chris and Kelly.
I know Chris and Kelly. I was in Carlisle's class when his ex brought them to visit last year.
I thought Carlisle had custody.
No. And here's another shocker for you. Chris and Kelly are girls.
So this is this kind of puts the jig up on Poison Ivy and Batman and Robin head off back to the suburban home of the Carlisles at this point, where we get a little Robin reconnaissance as he's looking in through the window, and the boys and Stephen are sleeping. So Batman and him begin sneaking around, and Batman sets up a little trap as an insurance policy that we'll see later on as to where that comes into play. But as they break into this greenhouse, they see that the plants are plastic, which leads to a little cavern underneath of the greenhouse where they go down, and straight out of a horror movie at this point, some hands jump out of this mysterious tub and beg them for help.
Dr. Carlisle? Help me. She's insane. Has to be stopped. You don't know what she's done.
Mommy? Mommy?
No.
It isn't possible.
Mommy? Mommy?
I was her doctor in Arkham. She said she wanted to reform. I trusted her. Let her get too close.
One little kiss, and dear Stephen was my slave.
We realize that these hands belong to none other than perhaps the real Stephen Carlisle, as he begins to try and explain what's happened to him. He says that he trusted Pamela, and he believed that she was ready to move forward with her life, but unfortunately she had taken advantage of him. And it's at that point that Batman and Robin turn around to hear some children's voices, just the creepiest children's voices that you will ever hear, and see some plants that are struggling to open up and sort of give birth to these mutant children. And that is when Poison Ivy herself makes an appearance and begins to sort of explain just exactly what happened. She was in desperate need of wanting to have this normal life and raise a family, but she wanted control over them, and she realized that she needed money, and in order to be able to grow these experimental plant babies that she used by combining Carlisle's DNA. By the way, she tricked him by using her mind-controlling lipstick that we saw back in Pretty Poison. So she used that to trick Carlisle, and then she's using Carlisle's DNA and mixing it with humanoid, like to make these humanoid plant children.
She refers to his raw materials.
Oh,
it's what she says. She extracts his raw materials in order to create these pod babies.
Nice way to get around the censors for that one.
There's a couple little notes I have about that. There's a commentary track on this on the, I think it was originally from the original DVD release, and then was ported onto the Blu-ray version as well that I watched today. And yeah, the bit about her being sterile and not being able to have children, Paul Dini has been quoted as saying that he thought that might get the whole story thrown out right away, just to expressly state that. And then yes, and then the bit that I personally couldn't believe they got through was her talking about extracting that her fake husband had supplied raw materials of it, and she had extracted his DNA. I was like, wow, they really got away with some stuff in this one for sure.
He was useful in signing my release papers and for supplying certain raw materials for my experiments. But the marriage was, well, a fake.
And these mutations?
Our children, Batman. Plant-based life forms enhanced with Stephen's DNA. They're not truly human. In fact, their lifespans are somewhat like certain rare flowers that blossom and die in a few days.
I see. At first, it looks like a child. Then it resembles Dr. Carlyle. And in its final phase...
In its final phase, before it burns itself out, the creature becomes my willing enforcer and bodyguard.
Indeed. And I sort of buried the lead there. Like, that was the whole point of her. She mentions that in one of the conversations with Batman that there comes a time where a woman really does want something more in life, and that she wanted to start a family, but she was unable to because she was sterile. And it was a trade-off, as she said, for her immunity against poisons and toxins, that Mother Nature unfortunately left her sterile, which I believe also, correct me if I'm wrong, what Paul Dini mentioned was originally a Denny O'Neil, the famed Denny O'Neil, had used that in one of his Batman stories, and he lifted it from that. Having found it so interesting and such an interesting plot device. So yeah, so she can't have actual kids, so she's using the quote unquote raw materials mixed with plants to create plant humanoid babies that really aren't babies. And we learn, Batman begins to put the pieces of the puzzle together, that they start out in the form of these children. They have sort of a rapid growth. Poison Ivy said their lifespan, unfortunately, does not last but a few weeks, or in some cases a few days. Their initial form is the young children, the form that we see, the children that she's purporting to have been Carlisle's. And then, of course, they eventually grow up into the adult form, which is the Carlisle form. And then right before they cease to exist, they turn into these horrible green plant monsters. So it's at that point that the plant monster that Batman met on the dock once again reappears. And we see that Poison Ivy has fed these babies that had just sort of hatched from the plants this accelerant, essentially, which causes them to also quickly grow into these beasts. So now it's Batman and Robin and Carlisle trying to escape 5 to 6 different plant beasts, as also the children and the Carlisle inside the house that Robin saw were also fed this accelerant. So there's just green plant beasts everywhere. And Batman and Robin are doing their best to try and escape as quickly as possible. And it's gotta say, it doesn't look good for a little while there.
Yes, but we have a little nod to this a little earlier in the episode when they first arrive at the house. Robin is kind of doing a little bit of recon, checking on, and he sees that the Carlisle and the other 2 children are asleep in the house, but that Ivy isn't there. And meanwhile, we see Batman fiddling with something next to the greenhouse, and we're not exactly clear what it is, but he just refers to it as insurance. And yes, as Batman, using some various different ways, he pulls out a couple of live power lines and shocks a couple of them. Robin pulls out a pair of hedge clippers to fight one of them off, which is a funny little bit there. But then we get our main event here, which is Batman swings up to the sprinkler system inside this greenhouse and breaks one of the faucets open. And as the liquid begins to pouring out, it's clear very quickly that this isn't just water. And in fact, as that distracts the rest of the monsters long enough for Batman to turn the sprinklers on completely, we see that he has filled it with weed killer. And of course, these all being plant-based beings, they're all slowly but surely melting away. Is that what does weed killer kill plants that instantly?
I mean, I think the commercial for Roundup does like an accelerated animation of it. It's usually within a couple of hours, but I don't think it melts them that way. Maybe this was like a hyper concentrated weed killer, you know?
And I guess she said that they're because of this accelerant she gave them, they were only going to live a couple of minutes anyway. So
the fragile DNA that they had, yes. Mm-hmm.
That's fine. I'll accept that. But yes, as the monsters begin to fade away and Poison Ivy sort of slowly walks up the steps and realizes what Batman's done. We're not quite done with our big twists yet in the episode. But first, I just want to point out that when Poison Ivy realizes that it's Weed Killer coming out of the sprinklers, Batman tells her, and his explanation for why he thought to do this is, and I quote, "I figured whatever you were up to involved plants." The world's greatest detective, ladies and gentlemen. He solved another.
Past him. He cracked the case.
Anyone else want their weeds whacked?
I figured whatever you were up to involved plants, so I pumped your water tanks with herbicide.
What was the tip-off, Batman? Stephen's kids?
You couldn't replicate them as girls, not with Carlisle's DNA. So you took your chance with boys.
I howled. It's just so superfluous. Like why you would need to say that, but But yes, he lets her know that he figured that plants were involved in a Poison Ivy scheme, and but as I said, there's one last final twist for the episode, which is that slowly but surely Poison Ivy also begins to fall and begins to melt away, just like these plant-based clones. As we find out that while she couldn't replicate, they mentioned that Carlisle's as I think you mentioned. Carlisle's actual children are girls, but she could not replicate that with only Dr. Carlisle's DNA. But what she could do was make a clone of herself, which she did. As we see, this clone sort of falls into Batman's arm and then slowly melts away, just like the other plant monsters have. And we find out that Poison Ivy got one over on Batman and Robin here and has escaped. And we kind of got the sun is starting to come up here as we see the police tending to Carlisle, and Batman and Robin are sort of just discussing the end of it. And, Robin's sort of lamenting that she got away, but Batman says that he doesn't really think that even though that she does get away, that perhaps we still aren't going to see her again anytime soon, because even though she went about it in the most horrific way imaginable, he still truly believed her when she told him that this was the first time she'd ever really been happy, and that this was really what she wanted for her life. And we kind of have that hit home as we see a plane leaving Gotham City that the real Poison Ivy is on, and she's looking in like an old memories photo album. We see some fun little Easter eggs to previous Poison Ivy episodes in picture form, and then the last shot is her wedding to the fake Stephen with her fake children's there, and we see her shedding a few tears as her methods may have been quite evil, but what she wanted, is a very human and normal thing to want. It's just the way she went about it, of course, being the most horrific and terrible way possible. So that's how we end it, with this very kind of bittersweet ending where the good guys win and the bad guy gets away, but nobody's really happy. Maybe the bad guy or bad girl in this case is probably the least happy of anyone.
Yeah, I guess we can get into our scores for the week. Great job. I'm giving ourselves a high five on that synopsis. We did a tremendous job there. But yeah, as I sort of watched this isn't another episode that I think we had this on videotape at one point. And so, it's one that I was somewhat familiar with. I had forgotten the reason why she had required the what her motivation behind it was. I didn't remember that, but that's certainly interesting. I think there are parts of it that are a little goofy. I think that the monsters end up being a little bit more goofy than horrific, which I think had more to do with the design of them that we'll talk about in visuals in a moment. But the twists are very interesting. I think that the horror aspect, like the idea of them going into this basement and seeing her growing like plant babies and those babies being really creepy, and the idea that she's the idea that this whole thing though was found out because she needed money in order to continue the experiments, in order to continue making these babies, in order to perpetuate her continued fake family's existence, is a little bit goofy. But hey, I guess you had to have some reason or some way for Batman to figure the whole thing out. So it's an interesting episode. It's an interesting concept. There's parts of it that are interesting. Because I didn't love the monster aspect of it, and it felt a little bit goofy at times with the plant monsters. I think I probably affected my score just a little bit, but I ended up settling on a 6 out of 10 for the story. I think there are certainly some classics, Paul Dini written heartstring tugs, wherein you have the realization that you're creating a character that is evil, but is evil for a motivation that you can, even if you can't relate to it directly, you can identify with the idea. You can certainly commiserate with them over the idea of, okay, she wants a family, but because she's criminally insane, this is the way that she went about doing it. Like, but right. there's tragedy in there.
Yeah, and that's something that Paul Dini talks about on that commentary track, is that one of the things he said about what makes a good villain, generally speaking, in a story, is that their wants and needs, whatever they may be in the story, are understandable. Like you just said, she's come to a point in her life where she wants to settle down, have a family, raise some kids. Very normal thing to want, a lot of people want that. It's very understandable to want that, but because it's what makes her a villain is the way she goes about it, and I think it plays very well into this Poison Ivy character of a need to control it completely. There's no half measures here, so to the point where she creates a never-ending assembly line of clones that start, they're her kids for one day, and then they play her husband, and then they turn into freak monsters that go rob rich people, and then they die, and we just keep this assembly line going. And it does get a little bit ridiculous and very, very sci-fi, very horror movie. It's definitely a lot of influence of that, I think. So it does get a little bit, you kind of blow it out to the ridiculousness of the way it goes. But it's a very human motivation that I think that follows her in this episode, and going all the way down to that ending of, she's not twirling her mustache or kicking her feet up like she's won the day and pulled one over on Batman at the end. Like she has this sense of loss, because even though it was this incredibly screwed up version, it was her Norman Rockwell painting. It was her, right. It was her white picket fence. Like it was what she perhaps always wanted, truly. So I think there's something really kind of fascinating about that. Yes, it's the part in the middle of the episode where Batman's on a jet ski fighting a giant Plant Hulk does definitely kind of break that, how what I think is like a really strong narrative. But then again, you go into, hey, this at the end of the day, you got to sell toys, you got to have some action, you gotta tell a story that's engaging for all ages here. So I went a little bit stronger with my score. I went with an 8 out of 10. I do think just because this is, and I say this as someone who probably is in need of reading. There's been a lot of more recent Poison Ivy comics where I think they've expanded this character that I have not personally read at this point. But this was maybe, this story is the most interesting I've ever found Poison Ivy as a character. Because like that's the gimmick always works, but you think of this in the same way of like a Mr. Freeze or somebody who, she's a fun gimmick. She uses plants as weapons. She has magic lipstick that she can hypnotize people with, and she can, use pheromones and all this stuff. Like it's a cool idea, but the character has never been particularly interesting to me on her own. Like it works when you pair with Harley and you're doing the Thelma and Louise thing, or later on you turn that into a romance as they have more recent years. But like on her own, I've just never found the character that engaging. Sure. And I think this episode, revisiting this today, I was like, this version of Poison Ivy is a really fascinating character, and it's a shame we never really get to delve back into this side of her in her subsequent appearances later on. But yeah, I think just for that sort of character study of her and her wanting the happy ending and to live a quiet, normal suburban life, but doing it in an over the top supervillain way, I think that's great, and I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly concur. I will say, if you are interested, and I know you have read these, so I'm just saying this to the listeners, but if you are interested in seeing more of that story sort of fleshed out, some of the tie-in comics, Batman, I believe the Batman Adventures Volume 2 and Batman Gotham Adventures sort of tackle some of that additional Poison Ivy stuff. Our friends at Watchtower Database also did a very interesting Poison Ivy video a couple months ago. You can check that out if you're interested. All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which is going to be animation and visuals. You mentioned at the top, Paul Dini wrote the story, Boyd Kirkland responsible for directing the episode, and then Dong Yang responsible for animation. All right. Highlights and lowlights. Highlights for me. Bruce Wayne's fits. We get Bruce sans tie and an open jacket for his normal old faithful brown and gold suit. I thought that was an interesting look. They went with that. Then again, we also have the dark suit with the with, as you mentioned, on the docks look. There's like this brief shot also where he's like rocking a turtleneck in the as they're putting the money together.
His money stacking outfit.
He's just rocking a turtleneck. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like that's an interesting, whether it's an homage to the Burton films where I believe Keaton's big in the news this week, if you're listening to this on the original drop date, but Michael Keaton, his appearance as Bruce in that in the famous 89 Batman movies, he'd rock a turtleneck or two, I believe. So I don't know if that's an homage to that or just the artist's choice for that, but I enjoyed that. And then yeah, the dark suit with the fedora on the docks, I thought was a great look. I almost would have preferred that be like what he wore. It feels a little bit less, I don't know, that brown suit. I don't get it.
Very strange choice.
Like the only suit this guy, like maybe the brown suit could have been the alternative. Then it would have been like, oh, that's interesting. So like he's wearing the Dwight Schrute special. Like, okay, he's wearing a brown jacket and a gold shirt. Okay, very interesting. Nope, that was his standard go-to. So that to me, we had to start off again with more of Bruce's fits. We had some great alternate looks last week in Avatar. If you didn't check that out, go back in the archives and check that out. It was even it's our poll of the week for our Spotify exclusive poll is which Bruce fit was the best one. We might have to run that back again here this week, which Bruce fit was the best for this week. But I will say I will also now sandwich compliment this and say I thought the visuals were wildly inconsistent. I don't know if you picked up on that at all, but there were scenes where characters looked way off model. They were shading Batman the wrong way. We've talked about that. I've talked about that several times. Like the Batman animated book had a very specific direction for like how the character would be shaded in these scenes, and it was always supposed to be kind of top down. That's why you had this sort of blue highlight on the top of his head, and then like you might get a little blue on his nose, but it would be kind of on the top of his nose. This, you're getting side highlights, you're getting stuff from the back, you're getting his face and the top of his head highlighted at the same time, so you kind of see this weird line across his forehead. There was characters whose faces looked different from scene to scene. The one scene where Bruce is talking to Poison Ivy outside of her home after the vines wrap around him, and why is Batman wearing a headset, like a gamer headset in that scene? Like, I know he's talking to Alfred, but like the first time, last time, only time we see Batman using a gamer headset, also weird choice. But that scene where he gets pulled off of the rooftop, the characters look like they're melting in that scene. Like it was some like ACOM not good level stuff in certain sequences. I know we've talked to a friend of the show, Kevin Altieri, who said that even though some of these episodes will have certain studios names attached to them, sometimes that they would then farm them out to smaller studios to do certain parts, and it felt like this was not a complete 100% Dong Yang production, because there were some scenes that kind of looked like your prototypical Dong Yang, and then there were other scenes where, whew, man, things were struggling.
Yeah, there's a real jitteriness, and they actually even point that out on the commentary track for this episode, that in almost every sequence in, I think it's the second act, when Batman's following Pamela around town, when she's walking, it's just got this weird jitter, and it's some sort of timing issue. They kind of use like some industry terms that I couldn't quite grasp about, like her being on the twos or something like that. I think it had something to do with how you time the animation versus, the actual animation itself being bad. But yeah, I would put that down. I think Dong Yang, as much as they became a mainstay later on in the DCAU, when they were kind of co-running things with Coco, for Superman, and even working on Static Shock and Justice League eventually, I think to this point they're just wildly, there's a lot of inconsistency in this. If you remember, they did Robin's Reckoning Part 2, which is just, if you watch those two episodes back to back, I think the first one is Spectrum and the second one is Dong Yang. I don't know if it's just that these designs were too complicated, and then Dong Yang kind of got their act together a little bit better once the designs were simplified and that kind of thing, or maybe it was working more hand in hand with Coco later on that kind of smoothed the process out. But yeah, there's definitely a little jitteriness to this, and I think some of the action is not, as a result, some of the action doesn't have the punch that it could have, literally and figuratively in some ways. And it's also the ending there, that last sequence is probably the best stuff. And I would say aesthetically, like design wise, there's a lot of cool stuff in this episode. You have the giant weird piranha cactus men walking around. That's a Bruce Timm design, by the way. I would have put money on it being Glenn Murakami, but it's a Bruce Timm design.
Yeah, you can find that in the Batman animated book also. I think we posted that on our social media this week. It's a great preliminary sketch that Bruce Timm did for the design of the plant monster man.
That's right. But so yeah, I like those, that whole sequence where Bruce is doing the ransom drop, and they're on the docks and it's all foggy, and they've kind of layered this over there. They talked a little bit about, they kind of put this, it's a very slow moving, it is technically animated, the fog, but it's just animated incredibly slowly, so it does have a little bit of life to it. But that looks pretty consistent all throughout that sequence, and that does make that sequence stand out very well. When Batman and Robin are going through the the greenhouse and they're going down into the lab. They have these flashlights and they're kind of pointing them all around. The way the light breaks as it kind of crosses the camera is really impressive. They had Boyd Kirkland was on the commentary track, and he mentioned that was kind of the first time they had tried this sort of technique, where I think before they would use kind of an airbrushing technique to show when they would, you know, animate a flashlight, but here they kind of put this darker matte, this filter over it, you know, over the entire image, and then just sort of left in the brighter parts, you know, cut out where the brighter parts would need to be. So you kind of darkened the whole image and then just cut out where the light needed to be, rather. So I like that was, which is apparently a very common technique now, but this was the first time on the series that they had really attempted that. So like I think that's pretty fun. The pod babies are so haunting.
Yeah. The way they're like, they almost do like a what's the Exorcist type thing where their heads turn around. Like it's not a complete 360, but it's sort of like a 180 where they turn around as they're sort of being birthed out of the pod, and they're saying like "Mama." It's super creepy.
Yeah, the shot of Poison Ivy when she kind of enters the room in costume for the first time, and she's sort of just riding a vine, like she's sort of on like she's on a swing set.
Yep.
I think that's pretty neat. Yep. I will say the actual, when the babies transform into like young men and then into the big monsters, that I don't think that looks bad. But all I could think about was Spectrum would have looked so much better if this was TMS or Spectrum. Like because we know, right? Because TMS did Feet of Clay. You know, Spectrum did On Leather Wings. We've seen these incredible transformation sequences and body horror imagery that they can pull off so spectacularly. And I was like, this one. And I again, that's something I remember when the first time we talked to Kevin Altieri, where he's like, should have gone to TMS. So much better. And that's exactly what I was thinking about. I was like, if this was a TMS episode, this would be tens. This would be tens across the board just for that last 5 minutes, probably.
Absolutely.
But like I said, I don't think that's bad, but there is, I think, an inconsistency in the animation itself, which lets down the very strong work being done by our character designers, by our background designers. Because again, it's a very unique environment. They're in suburbia, then they're in this greenhouse, in this strange lab at the end of the episode with these pods and everything. Like it's a really, really, really well done, and it's a very neat aesthetic. But the actual animation itself, I think, is what lets this one down, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I think there are some great things in the episode. You know, I did like how the first scene they use the silhouette, and you don't really see the goofy, like freaky looking design that Bruce Timm did for the plant monster. It comes back later on in the scene where he's hanging out in the back seat threatening Bruce. I actually really enjoyed that sequence altogether, even plot wise, as you mentioned, like the idea of him slamming Bruce towards the steering wheel or what have you. But again, it sort of harkens back to a typical monster movie or even a horror movie where the monster is behind him and is able to somehow escape view. And Bruce gets out and looks, and he's on an open road, looks up and back, and you get this beautiful sequence that sort of kind of fades out of him looking down the road with no sign of where this, hulking monster went to. So it leads to just like, well, how fast is this monster? Like, how fast can this monster move? Like, is this like a Jason Voorhees type where he's just he has superhuman speed? Like, what's going on here? So I really enjoyed that sequence. So there is some stuff that was like, there's good skeletal foundation here. Like there's good stuff that could have been here. It just, as you mentioned, I think what the finished product ends up sort of, letting it down in places. There's still, I think it's hard to balance. It would be like breaking this down further. Like the animation, this is why we do visual and animation, I guess, because the animation does let it down, which brought my score down, but there's still some really great visual stuff in the episode. So all of that combined to, if I just went animation, this would be real low. But because of some of the very, very interesting visuals that I think accompany this, I settled on a 6 out of 10 for animation and visuals. What about you?
Yeah, I went with the 7 out of 10. I do think, like I said, there's so much great design work in this episode, and the creature designs, that whole last act, I think kind of saves it. There are a couple other minor things I can nitpick. One is that this is one of those episodes where Robin's green parts on his suit are blue.
Oh, yeah.
Because at the time, which is funny because you would have thought that could have been corrected because I'm watching the Blu-ray version.
Right.
But they didn't correct that. They just did an HD. Well, I don't think
it really looks blue.
Right. Yeah. It's not I mean, and I know that's not, they don't actually recolor it. They just like put it through a processor that sharpens the pixels or whatever. So I didn't expect them to go back and recolor, but it is something that's so obvious to me. And at the time, it was very famously because they had a literal color palette that they used when they were painting these animation cells. And it was the same palette used for the Tiny Toons show. So there wasn't like a really good dark green that they could use for Robin's highlight color if he's in shadow, or if there's any kind of illumination that causes the need for a highlight color on his suit. So he ends up with this weird bluey green color on his suit for a lot of these episodes, and like that took me out of it. And then there's a part where Robin, once they pull Carlisle out of the tank or whatever that he's in, Robin takes his cape off and puts it around him to try to keep him warm or whatever, and Robin just suddenly, he has a red collar on the suit, which I feel like this happened in one other episode, and it irked me then too. But I feel like the cape has a collar on it, like it goes around his neck up to it.
Right.
But I've always assumed that the shirt actually stops at his neck, and I feel like we've seen that plenty of times otherwise. So that also distracted me a little bit. But again, these are nitpicky things. Like I said, I think the way they use, like you said, this sort of at the time experimental technique to pull off the flashlights, and the way the light breaks as someone walks in front of them, or they shine it right at the camera in a few shots. I think those are cool. That final act with all the pods, there's a lot of really cool stuff in there.
Did you like Robin's backflip when after he like completely unnecessary acrobatics after he's the scene as he's peering into the windows to check on the family as they're doing their recon in the third act. Robin just does a double backflip off of the roof, just because he wanted to remind everybody that he was once one of the Flying Graysons, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, Batman's getting stuff done. He's hooking up his weed killer because he thinks there might be plants involved. Meanwhile, yeah, Robin's doing a little routine. I think that's a cute little sequence there. So, like I said, there's definitely some pluses in here, and some really, really strong aesthetic work. I think you hit it there. There's a really good foundation on this episode, but it didn't quite all come together. But there's definitely still some highlights for sure. Yeah, I don't think either of us stopped to actually mention it specifically, but the actual quote unquote death scene for the poison ivy plant is very, very, it's done very, very well. It's very creepy. It's very, it feels straight out of a horror movie. I don't know. You have your villain at the end there is just melting in the hands of the hero, and the hero doesn't understand really what's going on, like can't comprehend what is happening as this being is melting in his hands. But yeah, again, the animation maybe let it down a little bit, but that's the fact that they were able to kind of also show that. And I get it, you're explaining away, oh, it's not real human, it's a plant being that's melting. Like they did a lot of melting plant zombie people in this episode. So yeah, lots of creepy visuals that stand out for a very interesting episode overall. Yeah. My last one was going to be when they hear the voice, the voice of the child calling out for mom
first, and then he slowly sees the pod open, and he gets the big round eyes, and just sort of backs up, and then you see the flashlight leave his hand and drop and break on the ground. I think that's again a great very very horror movie moment there, as we see the horrors of this man, this of science and evil have created. It's great.
Quite a spooky Valentine, if I do say so. All right, Lane, let's move on to our next category, which of course is going to be music. And as you mentioned at the top, the late great Shirley Walker responsible for this week's soundtrack. I didn't have a ton of notes other than I love the music for the opening scene. So we get a scene that's almost completely free of dialogue. Again, back-to-back weeks here where we have episodes that kind of open up with we did get sound effects with this one, but mostly relying on the soundtrack. But I love that it's not the Poison Ivy theme straight off the bat, but you get the hint of whatever that it's almost like a wind chime, or like I don't know if it's a glockenspiel. The first time use that term here on the review. Mark that down. 248 plus episodes into the series, and I said glockenspiel for the first time, but it's some sort of bell or chime or something like that is used, that just sort of rings out and adds to that like sinister creepiness, and it works perfectly. As we said, the theme of this being like a horror movie works very well because it just sort of sits there, and as this creature is climbing, it's just this one singular note that is mixed in with the orchestral music. You get that one singular note, and then the strings are playing and the horns, and then you get that one singular note, and it just kind of plays throughout that opening scene. And then, of course, later on, when Poison Ivy is once again revealed to be the actual person behind it, we get the classic Poison Ivy theme with that same instrument, and you get the variation of the notes. The music in that third act, I think, is really what stood out to me and was the strongest. Did you have any other varying notes or anything pieces that stuck out to you?
Not really. Yeah, it was that music that starts right at the title card and is kind of brought back, and when Batman is first visiting her at the house with Gordon, and then again when he's kind of following her through her day to day, and then the way they bring it back at the end of the episode, but now played in a much more sinister way, and you mix that in with the Poison Ivy theme and things like that. That's very good, and we've talked about that plenty of times before, of how you take a single piece of music but played in a completely different key or on a different instrument at the end, and it goes from this nice sort of, like we said, Norman Rockwell, white picket fence, happy suburbia soundtrack to this horrible, sinister, sci-fi horror movie at the end. It's quite impressive, and it was a great job done by Miss Walker, unsurprisingly. I will say, yeah, middle of the episode, as far as like the action sequences and stuff, I didn't have too many notes there for those. Other than that the sequence on the docks, I think they bring that sort of episode theme in a little bit, as this thing is as you get the big reveal and it begins to attack Bruce, and then of course you bring in the Batman theme at the end. I almost laughed when the Batman theme comes in, when he sets off the sprinklers at the end. It's like this real triumphant, like heroic thing, and then we're just watching these weird Cactus-Hulks melt into goo, and ba 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 ba. I was like, all right. I thought that was a bit funny, but yeah, I ended up settling on a 7 out of 10 for my music score. I didn't think there was anything spectacular, but like we said, the playing the same theme in one way to indicate this domestic bliss and happiness, and then bringing it down to this utterly horrific moment when the children are coming out of the pods is quite impressive. So I think that episode theme kind of helped out and brought the score up a little bit.
Yeah, I gave it the same exact score, 7 out of 10. I think the opening sequence and the culmination of the episode were enough to give it a pretty high score. No surprise that Miss Shirley Walker, she was really good at her job. She's a legend for a reason.
Absolutely.
All right, Liam, let's move on to our final category of the day, which, of course, is going to be our voice actors. We have a lot of returning series normal. I don't know what I'm saying. We have a lot of returning series voices here for this week. And then we also have a couple notable guest spots, a couple of names you might recognize just from roles outside of the show, of course. But let's go ahead and talk about this week's voice cast.
That's right. So we have some familiar names, some name we've talked before, and a couple of fun guest stars here. Playing a very minor role, and I guess at the time she wasn't a big celebrity, so that can be understandable. Playing Dick Grayson's little girlfriend in kind of the one scene is Megan Mullally, who of course folks would know from Will and Grace and Parks and Rec and plenty of other things as well. Like ended up being like one of the biggest comedic stars of her era for for that show. And yeah, here she just I guess before she'd made it big here, she's just doing a little voice there. So it's always fun when those little footnotes show up there. So a fun one to see in there. And then doing the voice of the plant monster when they're in their monstrous form is Jim Cummings, who we've talked about before. He voiced Tigress on the Tiger episode, as well as the weird ape guy. Everybody else was a cat in that episode, and if there's an ape henchman, never like. I was just thinking about that today, and it pissed me off again.
What a legendarily bad episode. Check out our review of that one in the archives at DCAUreview.com or on your favorite podcast app or on the Pod Tower on YouTube if you want to hear our thoughts on that terrible episode.
Guy's obsessed with cats for some reason. He made an ape man. Anyway, but he played Tigress in that episode. Also, probably more famously for people who maybe like good things, is he's the voice of Tigger on many iterations of Winnie the Pooh.
That's what Tiggers do best. There you go.
That's right. And Darkwing, I believe he's also the voice of Darkwing Duck in a lot of things. A lot of Disney afternoon credits and for Mr. Cummings there. So fun to hear his voice here as the monstrous plant monster again. And another voice that we would hear later on is Scott McAfee, who plays Chris Carlisle. Would go on a little bit later on to voice Willie Watt in Batman Beyond, and a few appearances there. So that's kind of a fun one there. And then we have playing Dr. Carlisle, we have Peter Strauss, who, if you look up that guy's Wikipedia, you'd probably know his face because he's been in every show. Like there's just a lot of one episode of Law and Order here, one episode of Grey's Anatomy there, but you can follow his career all the way back to the 80s or even late 70s. So you can see him on things like the Carol Burnett show or things like that as well. And then, a lot of voice acting credits to his name as well. So playing Dr. Carlisle, the would-be husband of Miss Isley here in this episode. So that's a fun bit as well. But then, yeah, I think really other than we do briefly have Bob Hastings as Commissioner Gordon and Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. as Alfred, but we have our two lead heroes, and then of course we have Diane Pershing as Poison Ivy, and kind of like I already talked about in plot, this is, I think, the best. This is the best solo Poison Ivy I think we got in the whole series. And it's funny because in the first half of the episode, Miss Pershing, it's played very straight. Like it's funny because that's literally a line in the episode. Is Batman says, "I want to believe it. Like I want to believe that she's changed." And I feel like that comes through in Miss Pershing's performance so much in this episode, because you do get this feeling that, when she talks, there's a bit of, melancholy when she's talking about not being able to have children of her own, and how happy she is with Dr. Carlisle and his kids, and all the way through to the end when she's, when she's talking, then she takes this horrifying villainous turn down the end. And even at the end when she's playing the clone of herself and it's sort of grappling with the fact that it's dying, and is sort of, giving a little bit of expository dialogue about, Poison Ivy escaping or whatever. This is definitely, I think, her best episode that we've covered to date for sure.
Yeah, her performance is really, really strong. Especially the emotion I think that she has in her chemistry with Kevin Conroy in that scene where she's talking about what I think the initial interview where Commissioner Gordon and Batman come in is pretty strong with her trying to, show that she's changed and reformed and that she's moved past what she used to be. She really does a good job of selling that in the way that she delivered those lines. And then I think the chemistry that they have later on, no pun intended, the chemistry later on that they both have in the scene where she's again trying to explain to him that she's moved on, this is what she wants. She wants a life, and he sort of delivers some lines that are, he just sounds empathetic, and him desiring to want to believe that one of his arch enemies could possibly turn over a new leaf is really communicated effectively through the way that they talk to each other. And then at the end, once this, Miss Pershing as the clone is delivering the entire soliloquy of what what the plan was and all this exposition, she kind of returns to that classic evil undertone that that she kind of delivers, and it's just it's a strong performance all the way around for the cast, I felt. But I think for her it's definitely in comparison to some of the other solo Ivy episodes that we've had, I think it's her strongest performance because she gets to show a little bit of different emotion. I feel like it's not just angry plant lady that's mad at the world. She has some subtleness to the way that some subtlety that she has to the way that she delivers some of the lines. So it's a different performance. There was different things asked of her, but I think that it's the most effective because you get to see a little bit more of the way that she can act as opposed to just kind of shoehorning her into the rage mode that she kind of has for a lot of the Poison Ivy episode. It actually kind of harkens back, I feel like, maybe to the first episode, to Pretty Poison, where she has more of that, like she's the girlfriend of Harvey Dent. So you saw a little bit more of that softer side. And then after she kind of turns and reveals her evil plan in that episode, from there, we just kind of get straight angry Poison Ivy from then on. So having her kind of revert back to that softer, calmer, gentler, feminine Poison Ivy is certainly very interesting, and I think was done really well.
Yeah, and to your point there, you either, I think in her subsequent appearances, which have I think all been in ensemble episodes that we've covered since her first appearance here,
except Eternal Youth.
Oh, of course.
Bad episode.
Blocked it out. Forgot about it, blocked it out. Most of her episodes have been either she's playing, kind of this sultry vixen, and she's kind of being, she's in Almost Got Him, or one of those where she's kind of playing off the other villains and she's kind of being very sarcastic, or just recently in Trial, which we talked about, or she's playing this unhinged, like fly off the handle angry, when she's bouncing off of, when her frustrations with Harley, or, in Joker's Wild, when she and Joker are arguing over the TV or whatever, like, so getting to see this completely other side that we've really never seen from her, where it's just this more sort of, content, simple, domestic housewife version of her, I think is great. And the way, as you said, then transitions into the more traditional, the more sinister turn at the end of the episode. It's a great job by Miss Pershing, and as you mentioned, Cal, getting to play off of Kevin Conroy, the late Kevin Conroy, as Batman. That those two together and their interactions, like we've just been talking about, that sequence when she catches him spying on her at the house, and she sort of tells him to leave her alone, and he sort of begrudgingly accepts that she isn't involved. I think them, as you said, the strength is those two playing off of each other in this episode. And of course, you also have Kevin Conroy getting to play off of Lauren Lester as Robin. First episode we've talked about with him for a little while here, so always fun to get him into the mix as well. But yeah, overall, I think on the strength of Miss Pershing and certainly Kevin Conroy's performance as well, I ended up going with a very strong 9 out of 10 for my my voice acting score.
Nice. I just went 1 point lower with an 8 out of 10. One note that I will say, I loved the Lorne Lester. He's mostly quips in this episode for the most part, with the exception of the scene with him trying to get romantically involved with Cindy, as she's called. But I love as Poison Ivy is revealing her plan at the end of the episode and giving through all this exposition, Robin responds with, "Lady, you're nuts."
It costs money to raise a family.
You haven't changed a bit.
Yes, I have. I meant it when I said I wanted a family that loves me. I just wanted it on my terms.
Lady, you're nuts.
Well, that's your opinion.
And she responds just as calm as can be, saying, "Well, that's your opinion." I thought that was absolutely perfect, and the delivery that Miss Pershing does in response to this very insulting line that Robin has was really good. But
a good quip too is when he grabs the shears and asks who wants their weeds whacked.
Yeah, that was good.
And then snaps the shears back and forth. I think that's a fun little bit there. So a minor performance certainly for Mr. Lester this week, but some fun notes there as well.
Yeah. All right, Liam. Well, that would begin to wrap things up for the episode. So that means that we should go ahead and give our final scores for today. So totaling everything up, I end up with a 27 out of 40. What about you?
Yeah, and I think I was just a little bit ahead of you in almost every category here. I ended up with a final of 31 out of 40. So I really enjoyed this episode. We can talk about rewatchability here. It's hard to say that it's important because she's just back eventually.
Right.
This is her last appearance in the original animated series, but there's no explanation to her coming back. She's, the very first episode of the new Batman Adventures, she's in it's the holiday nights and she's just in an apartment with Harley. Like there's not a big explanation of where she's been, and in her subsequent solo adventures that she does get in the new Batman Adventures, that's not really delved into. As you mentioned, there is a tie-in comic that plays off of this a little bit later on down the line, but we don't really get any follow-up to this directly. It doesn't, even though it feels like this big pivotal moment and a big shift for the character. So unfortunately, I think this gets I would give it a thumb up just because I think it's a good episode and it's a memorable episode. We didn't mention this, I don't think, during the episode. This one has a little extra nostalgia baked into it because it was one of the episodes that made up the Adventures of Batman and Robin Skybox trading cards. Which, if you follow us on the socials, you saw us posting about them this week. But that's they're very not particularly high quality, but they were stills from various episodes from this second batch of episodes, including this one. And so it's got a little extra nostalgia for me. So as much as I'd love to give this a 1 or even 2 thumbs up, it's hard to feel like it's that consequential an episode as far as continuity goes, or even just, it feels like it should be a big important character moment, but when she comes back, it's kind of just business as usual. So
right.
So I guess it's hard for me to say this is a must watch if you're going back through these, even though it's one that I would probably watch if I was going through for like a personal rewatch, just because I like it. But hard to say it's a must watch given our ever shifting scale of how we give these give these things thumbs ups or thumbs downs for rewatchability.
Yeah, I'd give it a 1 thumb up just because it's a Paul Dini written episode. Those are, as we mentioned, adding layers and different dynamics to your villains is an important thing, and is elementary in creating a villain that stands the test of time. So the best episodes that we look back on for the animated series tend to be the ones, as we mentioned, where you can relate to the villain or there's a motivation that makes sense. with a hint of tragedy mixed in with their criminal insanity. So all of those factors, as we mentioned, play into this. Is it a little bit goofy at times? Yes. So that probably, is it seminal to the actual entirety of the DCAU? No. So because of that, I'd say it's not a must watch, but it's a good episode. It's a Paul Dini written episode. There's some interesting things in it. There's some spooky horror elements that are used to just tremendous effectiveness. So yeah, I'll give it a 1 thumb up for rewatchability. All right, Liam. Well, that will begin to wrap us up for this week. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Don't forget, if you want to support us, there's a multitude of ways to do so. We'll run through those now. You can subscribe to us on your favorite podcast apps, whether that's Apple, Spotify, Google, or any of those other ancillary podcast apps. Go ahead and subscribe to us. If you follow us on Apple Podcasts and you feel generous, you can go ahead and leave a 5-star review, leave a little blurb about what it is that you enjoy about the podcast. As we mentioned recently, there have been several recent reviews, so we appreciate those 5-star reviews, people taking the time to say what they like about the podcast, in case somebody else stumbles upon our little show here and want to know what's interesting about it or what stands out about it. So we appreciate that. If you listen to us on Spotify, you can also leave us a 5-star review there. You can engage via the Spotify exclusive poll and the Spotify exclusive question of the week. So you can leave your feedback there. Lots of opportunities to let us know what you think of the episode, or whatever our funny poll of the week is, to engage with that. You can also, of course, follow us on social media at DCAU Review, both on Twitter and Instagram. As Liam mentioned, with the Batman the Animated Series stuff, there's just like a myriad of nostalgic things to talk about each week. So if we're doing a month of Batman the Animated Series, you can bet your bippy that there's going to be talk about tie-in comics and merchandise and all that stuff. So we try and include as many of those things for whatever show we're doing. But of course, Batman the Animated Series just happens to have the most available selection of that type of at media outside of the actual cartoon. So check that out. You can also, of course, follow us on Instagram, as we mentioned. Some great stuff happening there. Love seeing and interacting with people as we talk with you on the social media. Slide into the DMs if you want to chat. You're not looking to post in public. We can definitely chat there if you're interested. Of course, if you're looking to support us monetarily, we would greatly appreciate that. You can check the show notes out. There's a link directly to support us through our anchor.fm link. If you want to donate to the show, buy Liam and myself a coffee. You can also go ahead and check the show notes and head over to DCAUreview.com and the shop there. There's some interesting gear that you can purchase, shirts and hats and mugs and whatever fits your fancy, if you want to support us that way. And of course, as we mentioned at the top of the program, you can also always subscribe to us on youtube.com/thepodtower. That is another free way to support the podcast. Like the videos as we post them each week, and comment there, and give us a little old subscribe there. Liam, we are continuing here in the month of February with our Batman the Animated Series reviews, and why don't we highlight what we'll be covering next week?
That's right. So yeah, really the hits just keep on coming this month. There's been a lot of fun ones to talk about, and this one I think will be fun to talk about, but perhaps for a different reason. This is because it is sort of infamous as one of Bruce Timm's personally named least favorite episodes of any of the shows he ever worked on. And that is, of course, the episode The Terrible Trio.
Wow. Look at another one of those that we had recorded on videotape. So be interested. I haven't seen this one in several years. I'd be interested to see if we can look through it with that critical lens and agree or disagree with the person responsible for the episode. Also, we would be remiss not to mention, we have our bonus episode review of Batman The Adventures Continue. Season 3, Issue 2 dropped this week as well. So make sure, if you are following along with those, if you haven't checked those out, give that episode a listen. We'll have some interesting chats about exactly what happened in this month's issue and where we're headed with the rest of the series. But you won't want to miss that.
Absolutely.
But until next time, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.